All right, happy Wednesday, everyone. Now, you may not know it, but we're in the middle of International New Friends, Old Friends Week, and we're going to be fully celebrating that on the webinar today. We're going to be going international with our topic. We're going to welcome a brand new guest to the webinar series, and I've been your friend on these webinars for almost 9 years now. In Sweden, almost all single-family homes are ordered from catalogs, built in factories, and assembled rapidly on site. They have an incredibly mature prefabrication industry, which has been improving its methods for almost a century. Here in the US, prefabricated housing often gets a reputation as cheap and poorly designed. But in Sweden, it has the opposite connotation. The typical Swedish catalog house is high quality, structurally robust, super insulated and airtight, with superior comfort and low energy use. Factory-built housing in Sweden today is built with less labor in less time and to a higher standard than anywhere else in the world. Today we're going to go inside the Swedish home building industry and explain its success. Here to share his insight is Dr. Anthony Denzer. He's a professor and department head of civil and architectural engineering at the University of Wyoming, and he leads the Building Energy Research Group. Tony is the author of The Solar House, Pioneering Sustainable Design, which was published in 2013. Last year, he won the Outstanding Architectural Engineering Educator Award from the Architectural Engineering Institute. Now, Tony has been studying the Swedish home building industry for several years, and that's why he's here with us today. Now, I need to make sure I mention our sponsors for this webinar. The first one is Mitsubishi Electric. Mitsubishi Electric promotes sustainable building through the electrification of residential and commercial heating and cooling products. Their mission is to advance technologies that reduce waste output, promote sustainable resource cycles, while increasing energy efficiency and eliminating dependence on fossil fuels. Our next sponsor is PowerShift by NV Energy. It's a program that helps residential and business customers conserve energy and save money on their power bills. PowerShift is a one-stop resource to find energy-efficient products and services. For more information, please visit nvenergy.com/PowerShift. Next, we have Panasonic Healthy Indoor Living Solutions. Panasonic is helping builders across the country differentiate themselves with powerful, code-compliant, and cost-effective indoor air quality solutions that provide a safer environment for homebuyers. And as a leader in insulation and energy code testing across the United States, True Team and Top Build Home Services offer innovative solutions which align with their commitment to protecting the environment. They are also innovative leaders in building science, offering a number of services designed to help builders apply building science principles to new home construction. Now we'll be taking your questions like we always do. Just use the questions box on the right side of your screen to send in your questions. I'll review those and pose them to Tony during the Q&A time set aside after his presentation. Tony, take us away to Sweden.
Thank you, Mike. Hello from Laramie, Wyoming, everyone. Thank you also to Sam Rashkin, who invited me to speak as part of this series. And of course, thank you all for being here and giving me a little time and attention. So yeah, I'm from academia. I'm not in practice. You'd rather hear about this subject from a Swedish home builder, but I must say they're quite modest. And they really don't believe they're doing anything remarkable. So I feel like their ambassador a little bit, because I have been studying the Swedish home building industry for a number of years now. They're very, very good at what we call prefabrication, and I just want to share a little bit about that with you. So yes, if you are a Swedish consumer, you can order a catalog house today, choosing from a wide variety of types and styles. It will be delivered in about 6 months and assembled on site, often in one day for the shell. It'll likely have walls that are R36 with R60 in the roof and R30 or more under the slab on grade. It will be all electric, and use relatively little heating energy. Not quite to passive house standards, but pretty darn close. And if you are a sort of middle class Swede, it will be affordable to you as well. So there's a lot going on there that we couldn't admire in America and perhaps learn from. Now, I do want to acknowledge, since this is a green building audience and probably pretty sophisticated about sustainability, yes, I am talking about detached single-family homes here. I'm not necessarily advocating for this type of planning. It's not the most sustainable pattern of development, and it's not going to solve social problems in the way that cities like Los Angeles might need currently. And in fact, Sweden is also very skilled at multi-rise or multi-family mid-rise housing projects. So, but nevertheless, as a historian, which I am, it's very striking to me to compare the home building industries in Sweden and the U.S. And of course, the home building industry is very important in the U.S. today and historically and presumably into the future. And so I'm engaged in a larger project that I want to really explain historically how Sweden has created and developed such an advanced approach to housing, while American home building is often characterized by low productivity and low quality and waste. I know there are exceptions, and I have tremendous respect for American home builders, but there is a kind of parallel historic story to be told here, and that's the larger project I'm engaged in. And one more quick note to lead off. I definitely want to acknowledge my friend Scott Hedges, who got me interested in this subject about 6 years ago. He's assisted my research in a number of ways. We've traveled to Sweden together. He's arranged visits to house factories and architects, and he's contributed some of the images in this presentation as well. So thank you, Scott. So let's visit Sweden. I want to begin with this kind of satellite view of one of the larger house factories in Sweden, Merslöhus. And this is a small town, Merslo, which is essentially a company town and has been for many decades. This image, I feel, tells a compelling story right off the bat. And part of that story is about the relationship between the forest and the house factory. Many of the house factories in Sweden are located in the forest, which they manage sustainably, and that's sort of indicated off to the left there, where you see the planted trees. The forestry industry and the home building industry are essentially synonymous, and they have some of the most wonderful spruce wood that you can imagine. So here at Merslöhus, it's really not hyperbole to say that spruce trees go in one end of the factory, and the world's best walls and floors and roofs come out the other end. And in this case, Merslöhus is one of the bigger home building factories. They produce about 1,100 houses per year. If they go full tilt, they can build a house every hour. So part of the reason they're very good at this is because they've been doing it for a long time. They began in the 1920s building wall panels out of solid wood planks with sawdust insulating the cavities. And then and so Myrthlehus is the oldest one in Sweden that has been continuously operating since the 1920s. Catalog number 2 over there on the left. And in fact, some of the first prefabricated houses, catalog houses that they built are still standing and still in very good shape. So this and you can see the flat packing of the elements of the house, the walls, the wall panels, floor panels, roofs on a rail car in the upper left there. Flat packing was part of the innovation of this industry, and this gradually occurred over decades with incremental, small-scale innovations. Little by little, the industry progressed through the 20th century, and again, this isn't a history lecture today, but I just want to give you that background and let you know I'm working on a larger project about this. So, part of the motivation for prefabrication in a place like Sweden is probably somewhat self-evident. They have long winters, and so the ability to build indoors is a virtue that is sort of obvious, and we'll talk about some of the other kind of benefits as we go along here. But one of the things you can see here is that the work of building a house is done on tabletops at waist height, and this creates a very controlled but also safe environment for the workers, and I'll be emphasizing that from time to time as we go along here. Sweden has about 70 factory home builders, large and small, and I'm going to use a variety of different images in the slides as we go along to give you a kind of hopefully relatively complete overview. The techniques I find are pretty standard if you visit a number of different factories. They start to look pretty similar, and you'll find minor differences from one factory to another, but none of these companies have significant patented technologies or any kind of proprietary information. And so that's an interesting feature about the larger picture of the industry. So one of the things that really struck me right away is that in most of the Swedish house factories, they begin by building a wall. They begin with the window. And so you're seeing a sequence here that the window is laid down, and then the studs and the other wood members are placed next to it, and this is a hydraulic compression table, so it presses those members very tightly against the window gasket, and then it's nailed off, and then you have this in the lower right, a wall element that is then placed within the larger wall, and of course that's very different from the sort of American practice of building a wall with a hole in it, placing the window later, and then trying to seal the gaps with foam and caulk. So so that's a pretty fascinating aspect to that process. So this guy is building a wall. The sill plate is on the left of the image. The header is on the right. And insulation is sort of falling down like a waterfall from above. The studs are being lifted up from below. In this case, the nailing is done with a machine. And the worker is simply sort of observing the process and managing it. And then the wall elements with windows come in from the right side on a small crane. Again, he's building a house, but he's not cutting, he's not lifting, he's not on a ladder, he's not reaching, right? It's a very kind of safe environment. So this involves, it's really a kind of mass customization. There's not a standard sort of wall panel. There's a lot of variety that this system can produce. And so the production of the house really begins with the architect and the draftspeople who make drawings like this that describe every single piece and their location within the wall, and then that goes to cutting station where the pieces are prefabricated. That might even happen robotically in some of the bigger home building factories, but every piece is sort of staged and labeled and laid out in this way, and so there's more time spent in the design and more efficiency gained in the fabrication. So in the house factory, the walls are built, flat on tabletops, as we've seen, and they move down a kind of assembly line in different stages where, different pieces are added. The vapor barrier on the interior is pre-installed, and then you want to be able to work on both sides of the wall, so they have at the kind of end of the line this piece of equipment called the butterfly table, which essentially turns the wall over like a pancake, and then it can move back down a parallel line, again, station after station, with different elements being added to and you end up with a value-added product that has, of course, tremendous value. By the way, the factory machinery that you're seeing here, these tables and the butterfly table and so forth, again, not proprietary, or you can purchase these tables in the U.S. So nobody on a Swedish house job site is up there, stapling house wrap onto a vertical wall, and the wind is blowing and they're on a ladder. This is all done much more efficiently indoors on on a tabletop as we see here. This is the outside of the wall, so you can see the weather, the WRB, right, the windows in there, and the furring strips, and he's applying the siding here in the factory. Similar process, different factory. Here the nailing gun is hung from above, and so that's very convenient. And but the nailing is done by hand in this case. Again, some of the bigger players are into robotics, and so here's some automatic nailing in this case. I think what I want to say, though, is that there's a range of sort of from high tech to low tech, or vice versa. So here's one of the smaller factories where there's no robotics at all, and American carpenters would be very comfortable using this kind of methodology. So I don't want to give you the impression that it takes millions of dollars to set up a Swedish house factory, because it doesn't. And in fact, there are a lot of very successful Swedish factory home builders that are small operations producing, 1 or 2 houses a month. Well, you've noticed probably in those images, the Swedish, the wall construction is extremely robust. They're not trying to save money on wood. It is plentiful, and so here's a typical Swedish wall. The studs are normally 170 millimeters or 200 millimeters. That's bigger than a 2x6 or bigger than a 2x8, respectively. And then the wall is furred out, both inside and out, to make sure that there are no thermal bridges. The cladding is back drained and back ventilated, which is an excellent principle of building science. Here's a different sort of representation of essentially the same information. Typical Swedish wall. The furring out on the interior also gives space for wiring chases, and so the electrical boxes are always inside the vapor barrier, and there's no penetrations there, so no air leaks and no punctures in the envelope for electricity and plumbing. Okay, so at the end of the line in the house factory, you get your house in pieces like this. Certainly numbered and labeled, but also produced in the order, or at least stacked up in the reverse order that they need to be placed. So when they go on the truck and the truck goes out to the job site, the first panel is ready to go in the order that they're going to be placed in the house. So that sort of attention to logistics is, of course, very impressive. The house factories also make roof trusses, and this is, of course, we prefabricated roof trusses here in America as well, so this is somewhat familiar. They have tremendous accuracy. Well, they've been working in tolerances of tenths of millimeters since the 1940s, and so the attention to quality control here is very high. In the case of these roof trusses, if you look carefully up here in the ceiling, you will see a little piece of technology. It projects the locations down onto the tabletop for each of the members in the truss. I don't know if this technology has come to American truss manufacturers yet or not, but that helps them get very high quality construction. And then they press the nailing plates in, and that you can see that machinery here as well. So again, all of this is, it didn't happen yesterday, right? They've been doing this through the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and they had all kinds of moments where they innovated or developed new technologies. So lots of types of fiberboard were invented in Sweden. Pergo, laminated flooring, is a Swedish product. They invented the truck-mounted crane that we see here, and so on and so forth. You guys are probably familiar with IKEA and the flat packing of furniture made out of often softwood from the Swedish forest or fiberboard. And I want to mention that IKEA and that method of furniture making grew up really side by side with the Swedish home building industry. IKEA started in the forest as part of the lumber industry, just as many of these home building companies did as well. Okay, so let's now move from the factory out to the job site. Of course, you need a foundation for the prefabricated elements. And so this is how they build foundations in Sweden. Again, this is extremely standard, I would say. So there are some houses that have basements or crawl spaces, but the vast majority are built slab on grade using this method, where they simply build a kind of flat pad of compacted decomposed granite, and then they have this foam formwork to create the slab with the downturned edge and the hot water radiant heating integrated. And so this is very, convenient because they don't need to excavate, and the soil may be frozen. By the way, you can buy the formwork like this in the U.S. Today as well. So this is commercially available. And the outside of the styrofoam forms here have a tough cement coated finish that is durable, and it's the finished product. Okay, and so the slab exists with the radiant PEX tubing inside. Then, again, before the house comes, they begin by building scaffolding around the perimeter of the slab, and then they're ready for the wall elements to be set into place. And as it says on the slide here, the goal is really to have the roof on in one day. This is sort of like a slogan among the carpenters. When you go out and watch this happen, they'll tell you proudly, roof on one day. Sometimes it takes 2 days, but they really want to be weather tight very quickly. So again, to note, the workers on the site are either standing on the floor or on a scaffolding platform. Okay, I admit there is a step ladder in the background of the right image, but it's really uncommon to see climbing, lifting, reaching. And you don't need a saw on a Swedish job site like this, because nothing is going to show up and need to be cut. So it's a very kind of humane work environment. If there's a construction accident on a Swedish job site, it is a national scandal, and as you've seen in some of the earlier images, I think women and older workers can really persist in this industry because it's again so sort of safe and low impact. Here's a floor cassette. That's what they call those elements. There are different methods of building raised floors or intermediate level floors, but none of them are like American platform framing, where the floor penetrates the wall. Whatever method you use here, the floor is inboard of the structure of the wall insulation, so that the envelope and integrity is maintained, so they don't. I mean, in American platform framing, I think a lot of you probably know, the floor becomes an issue that you need to come back and address with insulation methods. Well, spray foam, right, and the floor joists remain thermal bridges. That just simply is not part of any Swedish home building method. And for roof construction, again, different companies do have different methods here. Some are piecework, like the top image, and like you know, prefabricated trusses, like we are familiar with in America. In fact, I would say that's the most common. But in the lower image, you can see that prefabricated roof units are being lifted into place and set on a ridge beam in the top of the wall. So yeah, some variation in the industry there. But again, the objective is to very quickly make the structure weathertight and enclosed, and then move inside. And then the work may slow down considerably. You might, at this point, have a few months of construction on the interior. Roof construction, practically all Swedish houses have what we call a cold roof system. So the roof tiles are raised on wood sleepers or furring strips, um, so that they're back ventilated, back drained, um, and they avoid any potential ice damming. Um, and this method works irrespective of whether there's an unconditioned attic or an insulated pitched roof, as we're seeing in the drawing here. Okay, so if you're a kind of consumer in Sweden, you have a lot of choice, and it's a very competitive market. They pay a lot of attention to the consumers, and so you can, as a buyer, easily find a variety of styles, as I've mentioned. Um, and this is a critical concept, I think, that we sometimes misunderstand in America. The architectural style is really independent of the kind of internal nature of the structure and the fact of prefabrication. So they have very, kind of traditional styles as well as more modern styles, and uh, they like to adopt American styles as well. So you can have a Cape Cod house in in the Stockholm suburbs. Um, but again, the buyers have a lot of access to information, and I think they're quite sort of sophisticated. The link down here in the lower right, by the way, will take you to a really interesting video of one of the house companies and the way that they're using virtual reality with consumers. So they also have model home villages that you can visit. There are 3 or 4 of these around Sweden, and um, the different companies are displaying their current models right next to each other. So they have to compete very directly with their competitors in this format. Um, there is, as I just mentioned, a lot of variety, but um, I would call this the typical Swedish house. Very, very common, and it's kind of my favorite. The 1.5-story house where the upstairs rooms, which are usually the children's bedrooms, are sort of in the attic with knee walls and partially sloped ceilings. Of course, this is really logical in terms of optimizing the amount of living space with the least construction materials, and so it really reflects that kind of just Swedish pragmatism. And they don't have an appetite for square footage in the same way we do here in America. So that is that number 1,550 square feet is the nationwide average new home. And they don't use housing as this is just sort of a cultural comment. Housing isn't a sort of status symbol in Sweden, and the more wealthy folks don't use their housing to sort of display their wealth. Okay, so as a result of the way that this all works and the kind of efficiencies of building in the factory, they have much less sort of labor in the blue collar realm, and more, I would say, in what I would call the white collar realm, right? So more effort is required in sales and marketing due to that competitive marketplace, and because when you have a factory with workers, you need the kind of constant demand side stream of business because you don't want the factory to be idle at all, right? So Equihus is one of the larger companies. They produce about a house a day, and their sort of profile looks like you see here. About a third in architecture and drafting, about a third in sales and marketing, and a third actually building the houses. Everybody wants to know, are these houses expensive? Every time I give a presentation like this, so here are some of the prices, and these are advertised, guaranteed, turnkey prices. And turnkey means that everything is included and everything is guaranteed. You know, these are of course translated from Swedish currency into U.S. dollars, but I think it's a pretty fair translation. A whole other part of the story here is that land in Sweden, there are no third-party land developers, and there's no profit motive in developing land in Sweden, and so that helps with this equation as well. Are they energy efficient? Well, yes. They've been kind of ahead for many decades. And so Swedish houses were required to be essentially super insulated and airtight starting in 1984. And so by now, you can purchase from virtually any of these housing companies an extremely energy efficient house. And they advertise that number as well, and it'll be adjusted by location within Sweden. So they have essentially 4 different climate zones in Sweden, but even the warmest down by Malmo and Copenhagen is even their warmest climate is a very cold climate by our standards. So they do very well in terms of energy efficiency, even considering that it's a very, very cold country. I do want to acknowledge, as we're kind of wrapping up here, that that there are some operations here in the United States that have adopted Swedish-style construction. Of course, it's also been exported to Finland, Denmark, Germany. But in the U.S., here are some of the people that are really aware, have visited Sweden, I think, and purchased some of that kind of factory equipment. And so if any of you on the screen are in the audience today, tip of the cap, and I'd like to chat with you further. Again, these people are very, very modest, and they're happy to, first of all, they all speak English perfectly, so if you visit Sweden and you call up a house factory, they'll be happy to give you a tour and tell you about, although they'll be confused why you're curious, because they just think they're building houses in a very ordinary way. And so there's a very there's a culture of modesty there, and there are certainly no famous architects involved, which is probably another can of worms, or another part of the story that's quite interesting as well. Okay, so wrapping up, again, I am thinking in historical terms and thinking about comparing the Swedish industry to the American industry. Um, and so my friend Scott Hedges here, and I'll finish with his quotation. What would American house building look like if we had spent the past 40 years or the past 100 years um, um, developing these efficient construction methods the way that they have in Sweden? Okay, thank you very much. Happy to answer questions, Mike.
Yes, indeed, sir. Let's get you some questions from our audience, and audience that is your verbal cue to send in your questions. We've been getting a number of questions already, Tony. So let me get myself back on here, and we're going to go ahead and get back to some early questions, and we'll kind of make our way through. So one of the questions that came in from Jim was citing Volvo and Saab, and he says that they're very proud of their cooperative manufacturing, and that's in contrast to the monotonous U.S. assembly lines of old. Is the building manufacturing that you're talking about, is that following that cooperative manufacturing model that Volvo and Saab do?
Yes, that's a very good question. I believe that there are some similarities in terms of a kind of culture that values the laborers and certainly it's union labor, and they have a lot of input. The house factories. I believe some of the smaller companies, but I think this is rare, are employee owned, but the large ones are not. In fact, they're a number of them are owned by international corporate kind of conglomerates since the 1990s or so. There's I can't think of any examples of a larger house factory that is employee owned or a cooperative in that sense.
David, I'm sorry, not David. Moses had a question. What is the reason for most new construction being on grade and not including basements? I mean, that's something we see here in the U.S. as basements. People use it for a variety of reasons, whether it be storage or additional finished space. And the second part of Moses' question is, does including basements, or we'll just say below grade structures, does that complicate the prefabricated methods?
Well, okay, two parts. So first, I believe it's just a question of economy. First of all, avoiding excavation avoids costs. It helps them maybe get started earlier in the spring. Also, I think a lot of the sort of geology in Sweden is there's bedrock very near the topsoil, and so that might be the most important reason that basements are just sort of not standard. But there are some, they certainly can build basements, and it does not complicate the prefab. So part two, it really doesn't add any kind of complexity to the factory built methods. Of course, you have floor elements, so a raised floor, as I mentioned, may be built out of kind of prefabricated cassettes, they call them, or it may be sort of piece built on site. they always insulate their intermediate floors as well. Even in a two-story house or 1.5-story house, the interior floor is fully insulated with rock wool. I think mainly for acoustic reasons.
Well, you brought up the insulation part, and there was a question, well, a couple questions actually, kind of along those lines. One was from Jim. Are the assembled houses tested when they are nearly finished, and this we're talking about on-site, with blower doors or any kind of infrared monitors? What kind of testing is done? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, both. Blower door test with a thermal imaging camera is a very standard practice there. In fact, I believe the blower door was invented in Sweden in the 1970s. There's a little bit of contradictory information there, but I'm trying to unpack that. But nevertheless, Swedish builders were using blower doors since the early 1980s as a sort of standard practice. So the Swedish building code today, this is kind of funny, does not even spell out a standard for air tightness because it simply isn't needed. Just the average, kind of common practice produces an extremely airtight house, and they don't need to enforce that in the code. I guess because again the consumer-driven marketplace is so competitive. If you were building a leaky house in Sweden, the word would get around pretty quickly.
So it's really more about the market pressure than it is the hammer of a code or requirement.
Yeah, I mean they do have strict codes, but the airtightness is not spelled out specifically.
Gotcha. Okay. So along the lines of the testing, Mary Jo had a couple questions, and one of them is about HERS scores. How does some of their testing numbers or their efficiency numbers translate into HERS scores here in the U.S.?
That's a very good question, and I have to maybe just answer that I don't know. I should grab a student and make a small project out of that. I don't want to guess and give bad information. I think that these numbers here, which are in metric, if you translated those into English, you get most of the way to that answer, wouldn't you?
Sure.
But I'm sorry, I don't have a clear and direct answer to that question.
That's okay. Maybe someone in our audience is very knowledgeable on either HERS translations or even the Passive House folks. They may be able to do some of those number crunching. But we're gonna go to some more questions. First of all, I want to say hello to Jack. Jack is watching from Ireland right now, so we welcome Jack. Thank you for hanging out with us here in the evening. He wants to first of all thank you, Tony, for a really fascinating account of building systems and technologies in Sweden. He asks a couple questions. We're going to get to one now. We'll get to another one later. Given that wood is the principal building material, is maintenance needed more frequently than in the case of like a concrete block or a concrete mass wall build? And what is the average life of some of these homes?
Given that the very first ones still exist, I have to say the average life is forever. The siding is wood. it is treated with, I believe it's impregnated with a kind of iron type of treatment. You might be able to see that kind of here. So it's treated wood and then painted, and I mean I think the maintenance is that is required is routine painting, but beyond that, I believe it's extremely durable and long lasting.
Okay. And part of the reason he's asking this question is that he's saying that in Ireland, the public authorities are very suspicious of timber as a building material, and the local authority will quickly tell you about the fire risk. So that's his background and where that question's coming from. But he mentioned block and mass wall, and I'm going to interject one of my own questions here, Tony. Do you find similarities between some of these Swedish factories and some precast concrete factories, either in the U.S. or abroad?
Well, yes, because Sweden does precast very well too. Certainly for mid-rise buildings, and so they do have about half the housing stock in Sweden is single-family homes, and about half is multifamily mid-rise, let's say. And so yeah, there's quite a mature and sophisticated concrete construction industry in Sweden also. However, they're sort of independent and kind of parallel operations. They don't quite seem to mix, I don't think.
Okay. So I want to kind of delve into a couple of different themes or topics here in the way the questions are coming in. We talked a little about testing and some of the things that are done, but Stephen actually brings up a good question. Is there a building inspection process used on site, or is it more in the factory, or is it both? Can you talk to us a little bit about what building inspectors do?
Yes, there are building inspectors, and they certainly come on site after the period of construction, or after the that quick burst of getting the shell built, and then as the electrical and the plumbing are connected, and the heating systems and the ventilation systems. By the way, HRVs are standard since the 1980s. That the building inspectors are visiting during that period of construction and approving the work. I don't believe the inspectors come in to the factory. I don't believe they need to come into the factory setting.
Well, and it makes sense too for them to inspect on site. I mean, you got to look at plumbing hookups and make sure those are done properly. Electrical hookups are done properly. So it's not showing up 100% finished. And you hit on the HRV. You mentioned HRVs, and that was another question that Mary Jo had, which was, are they using heat pumps as heating systems, or can you talk a little about the heating systems? Obviously, HRVs are a part of it, but is there anything else in that mix?
Yes, heat pumps. So it's all electric. Heat pumps are common, air source and geothermal, or right. They do exhaust heat recovery heat pumps, exhaust air heat pumps. Those are very common, and then as you saw, most of the homes have radiant floor hydronic heating, although baseboard heating units are also fairly common, hydronic.
Yeah. Don't see a lot of natural gas use.
No.
Which, which is interesting because that's another thing that we are dealing with here in the U.S. And that brings me to kind of a couple of questions on a different topic now. So let's start with David's question, because I got like 3 of them on this topic. So what do you feel is the overriding issue as to why the U.S. home building industry doesn't make the jump to this kind of construction? Is it material supplies? Is it technology? Is it fear of change, or just the lack of interest in changing, inertia? What is going on there, in your opinion?
Yeah, thank you. I have thought a lot about this question, and I believe, in my opinion, as you asked for, it's a kind of inertia, but it's really about the way that we're sort of organized in terms of capitalism, and this is actually I think a good feature of the American home building industry is that even though it's dispersed, right, and disorganized in some sense, you've got the foundation subcontract, right? You've got the excavator, you've got the concrete sub, you've got the framing sub, you've got the plumbers, you've got the electricians, you've got the roofers, et cetera, right? The parade of trades. Well, they all have a profit motive, and they all get, in the end, to keep a little slice of the pie, right? And that is probably the answer in terms of what prevents us, from moving towards this sort of bringing, most of those things under one roof, right? But there are positive benefits as well, right, in terms of more of the small guys in America get to participate and make some money. So my father was a pipe fitter, and so I've been exposed to the construction industry for through that kind of lens since childhood, and so I see the benefits of the American system such as it is.
So let's go with Kim's question next, and then we'll get to mine. Kim asks, since the Swedes are building shell components and not 6-sided modules, he feels there's still a considerable amount of labor on site to get to turnkey. Does the U.S. modular building industry, with its finished boxes, potentially improve efficiency and avert U.S. labor shortages that on-site construction is currently suffering from?
Well, let me also mention that the volumetric construction does. There is a Swedish industry doing that, generally for let's say multifamily apartment buildings, basically, 2 or 3 stories tall. So there are Swedish house factories that build that way out of wood, but complete volume elements. And in fact, I think they were the innovators in that as well. So that works over there for small, let's say small multifamily projects. And does it reduce the labor required? I don't know. By the way, nobody studied any of this from a kind of economics standpoint, other than we have broad assessments of productivity, right, in the housing industry, but nobody's ever really compared apples to apples, a Swedish house and an American house beginning to end, and where the cost differences are and that kind of stuff. That would be a very interesting and big project to look at.
Where Kim was going with part of his question was, we're seeing a decline in the trades here in the U.S. People who are doing trades, and it's a concern amongst the building industry. Where are the people going to come from? Where are we going to find these people to build like we have before? Because we're seeing this decline. So that's more of where his question is coming from, on averting U.S. labor shortages that on-site construction is currently suffering from. He's wondering if the six-sided modules help to thwart that decline in trades or not. I don't know.
Yeah, so I get the question. I guess the honest answer is I don't know. But there's I mean, I think what I've observed here and what I've shown today, it indicates there's still quite a bit of labor involved, but I really don't know if that's if labor problems are sort of solved by factory prefabricated construction.
And I'm guessing I know the answer to my own question that I'll ask now on labor, but we'll ask it anyway just for fun. While there is still a certain amount of labor involved with the construction, as you outlined, you did also mention that this process uses less labor. The factory portion of it. Okay, so we could make some parallels to other industries here in the U.S. that use, say, either robotics or efficiency to displace manual labor. There seems to be a struggle, though, to find jobs for those displaced workers. How did Sweden react to that loss of jobs? Or has this really been going on for so long that they didn't really have to deal with the reaction to the loss of jobs because this is just how they've been doing it?
Yeah, I think again, I appreciate the question, and I understand it. I don't have a great answer, I don't feel, but I mean, looking at it historically, when this industry started in the 20s, and then there was a big growth period in the 40s, and then a huge growth period in the 70s, it was always sort of associated with a period of emergency when they needed a lot of housing built quickly. For instance, in the 70s, Sweden is famous for having they launched what they called the Million Program. They were going to build 1 million homes in 10 years, and they did. And so, even though on a kind of micro level analysis, you're potentially losing jobs. On the macro scale, the industry, grew, at a greater pace than any economic efficiencies were causing a loss of work. So I don't think they ever had to really confront that question of workers being disadvantaged by these efficiencies.
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured, but I just thought I'd ask anyway. So let's shift here to a different topic. Um, Elizabeth wanted to know how far do they ship their homes throughout Europe? Do they ship them overseas? Like, what's the range for some of these factory manufacturers?
Um, they um, they have a decent market in the UK, I believe, or at least they did at one time. Um, Brexit maybe has affected that, or maybe it had already tapered off before then. Um, they ship quite a bit to Japan. In fact, there are a couple of factories in the north of Sweden that only produce houses to send to Japan. Um, and they're Japanese in style and appearance. So that's sort of amusing. Um, and I mean I believe they they export to their sort of neighbors in Scandinavia, um, and maybe northern Germany. Um, they the Swedish home building industry was really aggressive in the 1980s in exporting, and they got burned because something changed in terms of the international currency exchanges and tariffs and so forth, and so they remember that, and so they do a kind of modest amount of exporting, but they really um, if you ask them, hey, why don't you flood America with Swedish homes, they actually don't want, uh, they don't have that ambition.
Gotcha. Well, and you mentioned Scandinavia. Our friend Jack from Ireland was curious as to where most of their wood is sourced. Is it Sweden itself? Is it other Scandinavian countries? Is it from Russia? And he shares a personal anecdote that when he lived in Lithuania, some of the new wooden homes were being manufactured from Russian timber. So where are they sourcing their materials?
Mostly it's local, and a lot, as I mentioned, of the factories are in fact lumber companies. Um, but there is some importing of wood from the Baltic region. Um, I'm embarrassing myself here. Is it Estonia that's directly across the sea, I believe, um, and and um, some uh, Finnish wood materials um, may come from Russia or from the Baltic countries as well. They have
And
beautiful
then
birch.
want to make a final call for questions from our audience. Thank you for sticking around with us. Tony,
You're
thank
welcome.
you for sticking around with us a little bit after the hour here. Our friend Jack again, he's curious about the training for the workers. In the U.S., that would be tradesmen. In
Yep.
Sweden, that would be the people who assemble the modules on site. How does the training differ?
Um, that's a good question. I think that um, that they do have a sort of apprenticeship model, where the companies hire young people and put them on a kind of trajectory where they're trained, whether it's in the factory or out in the field. I think it is analogous or parallel with uh, how a tradesman like a plumber or electrician is trained here.
All right. Well, I do not see any other questions, so this is my time to say thank you to Tony. Really appreciate the insight abroad, especially for those of us, most of us, maybe all of us who really can't travel too much to go check these things out ourselves right now. We appreciate the virtual travel to Sweden to check all this stuff out. So thank you very much for sharing all this insight with us.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mike, and thank you everyone for your attention and great questions. So I've enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah. Always thank you to our audience, and thank you to Huber Engineered Woods. I misspoke earlier. Did not list them in our list of sponsors, so I apologize to Huber Engineered Woods. But they are one of the sponsors of this webinar. Thank you to Mitsubishi Electric, Panasonic Healthy Indoor Living Solutions, and Top Build for being a sponsor of this webinar and the Housing 2.0 program. And if you liked what you heard today, this is the kind of insight and knowledge you can expect to get in the Housing 2.0 program. For more information and to register for the upcoming Q2 workshop series, please go to www.greenbuildermedia.com/housing-2.0. Our next webinar will take place on Wednesday, May 26th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be talking about building better cities with Karen Rogers and Jeff Hicks, and that will be our final webinar in May. I'd like to end today's webinar on a note of gratitude. This webinar marked my 100th webinar as host. I want to say thank you to Ron and Sarah at Green Builder Media for trusting me to handle these on behalf of their company. Thank you to Butch Gaudette, who was the previous host, it's a name from the past, for giving me a path to step onto, and Mary Kessner for being a wonderful producer and teammate behind the curtain. And finally, a thank you to all of our guests that we've had along the way for working with our team here, and certainly all of you for allowing me into your ears each and every time, and tolerating my unusual intros and exits. I know you have options when it comes to online webinar content these days, but thanks for spending part of your day with us. On to the